The studio lights rose slowly, painting the entire stage in a soft golden glow. It was the kind of light that made everything look larger than life, every movement sharper, every breath heavier, every moment stretched into eternity. As Mira and Eli stepped forward, the vast, echoing space around them felt unreal, as though they had stepped into a world that didn't belong to them. The floor beneath their feet pulsed faintly with hidden lights, guiding their path toward the center of the stage, where millions of eyes, both in the room and across the world, waited for something they didn't yet know. Mira held her brother's trembling hand, her touch gentle yet firm. She could feel the uneven rhythm of his breath, the racing of his heart, the invisible fear that wrapped itself around him like a second skin. She tried to steady her own breathing, but the enormity of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. The stage felt endless, but the silence felt even bigger. It stretched around them like a living thing, watching, listening, anticipating. The judges sat somewhere beyond the lights, but their presence felt immense, an unspoken force waiting to shape the siblings' fate. The crowd, thousand strong, seemed to merge into a single wall of energy. It rose from the seats like a tide, surrounding the siblings with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. People shifted forward, leaning in, sensing that something delicate and powerful was about to unfold. Eli's steps were small, almost unsure, but Mira walked half a pace ahead, letting her quiet strength guide him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every shared memory, every long night, every whispered prayer lived in the space between their hands. Her love had carried him through storms before, she only hoped it would carry him through this one too. When they reached the center, a hush fell deeper than before. Even the lights seemed to pause, holding their breath as they waited. For a moment, the siblings stood completely still, two small silhouettes wrapped in shadows and dreams. Their hearts beat in unison, their breaths sinking as though the universe itself had prepared them for this beautiful, terrifying moment. And then, as the world leaned forward, waiting, everything fell into perfect, absolute silence. Long before the bright lights of the AGT stage ever touched their faces, Mira and Eli's world had been shaped by simpler, quieter things. Their life in Manila unfolded inside a cramped apartment tucked between rusted rooftops and narrow streets where the sun hit hard and hope often felt too small to hold. The days moved with a familiar rhythm, the hum of tricycles, the distant call of vendors, the soft echo of children playing in alleyways. Yet inside their tiny home, life carried a heaviness that never seemed to fade. Their mother's absence was a silence no one knew how to fill. Her framed photo hung on the wall, a quiet reminder of the warmth they once had. For Mira, that picture became the symbol of everything she needed to protect. She wasn't just an older sister, she grew into someone far older than her years, stepping into responsibilities she never asked for but accepted with a steady heart. She prepared meals before school, studied while stirring pots, and watched over Eli during long nights when his breathing turned uneven. Eli tried to be strong, but the world had not always been gentle with him. His health had been fragile since childhood, each illness leaving marks on his small body and on their small family's budget. There were days when he couldn't run like other kids, nights when he couldn't sleep from the pain, mornings when the weight of weakness made him feel far older than his age. But every time he felt himself slipping, Mira was there, her hand on his back, her presence an anchor in the storm. Their father, Raul, lived between exhaustion and determination. His jeepney shift stretched long into the night, the rattling wheels carrying the weight of his children's future. He worked with a quiet desperation that only a parent could understand. But no matter how hard he pushed, life always found ways to test them, rent overdue, medical bills rising, dreams shrinking. Yet even in those hardest moments, there was one thing that refused to fade: music. In the dim corners of their home, wrapped in shadows and evening warmth, Mira and Eli found melodies that soothed the ache. Singing became their small rebellion against a world that demanded too much. It became the heartbeat of their home, the bond that kept them moving, the hope they carried when everything else felt uncertain. And though they didn't know it yet, those quiet, fragile moments were preparing them for something far bigger than the life they lived, something waiting on a distant stage, under blinding lights, where their past would become the reason the world stopped to listen. Eli's voice had never been just a talent, it was a miracle stitched together through years of struggle. When he was little, his health had been so fragile that even breathing felt like a challenge on some days. Doctors spoke in careful tones, offering a future filled with limitations. They warned that his lungs might never fully strengthen, that strain could take away what little voice he had. For most children, these warnings would have simply meant fewer playground games or quieter afternoons. For Eli, they meant something deeper, an uncertain future in the one thing that brought his heart alive. But every time life pressed him down, something inside him pushed back. It was small at first, like a flicker of light in a long hallway. He would hum while drawing, softly at first, afraid the sound might vanish. Mira would hear him from the other room, her heart lifting with each fragile note. She never interrupted, she simply listened, letting him find himself slowly, carefully, in those moments when he believed no one was watching. As he grew, the hums became melodies. The melodies became small songs. And the small songs became the quiet heartbeat of their home. The sound wasn't perfect, sometimes shaky, sometimes unsteady, but there was something in it that felt deeper than technique. It was the voice of a boy who had survived more than his small frame ever showed. Mira nurtured it with the tenderness of someone guarding something priceless. She spent evenings finding songs for him to practice, helping him breathe slowly, guiding him without pushing too hard. She knew the risks. She knew the warnings. But she also knew that taking away his music would mean taking away a part of him that had kept him alive through years of weakness. Their father often returned late at night to hear Eli practicing softly in the living room. Those fragile notes became his comfort after a long day on the road. They became reminders that even in hardship, beauty could still bloom. Yet he also worried, each high note, each long breath, felt like a test Eli's body wasn't always ready to handle. Still, the boy kept singing. Not because he dreamed of stages or audiences, but because it was the only place where his spirit felt unbroken. Every breath of music he released became a quiet triumph against every limitation placed upon him. No one could have imagined that the same voice once thought too weak to survive, would someday rise powerful enough to make an entire world stop breathing. Back on the AGT stage, the siblings stood beneath a single, soft spotlight. It washed over them like moonlight, gentle yet exposing every fear they carried. The silence in the theater was almost unreal, thousands of people waiting, listening, watching two young Filipino siblings who looked too small for a stage this large, too fragile to hold such heavy expectations. Mira closed her eyes for a brief moment, grounding herself in the memory of home, the sound of their mother's laughter, the smell of breakfast cooking on a small stove, the echo of Eli's earliest songs drifting through their tiny living room. She let those memories fill her chest, steadying the storm inside her. When she opened her eyes again, she wasn't just a nervous teenager on a foreign stage. She was someone carrying her family's entire journey in her heartbeat. Beside her, Eli inhaled slowly, his breath tight but determined. Every note he would attempt tonight pushed him beyond the limits doctors once warned him about. But he had come too far to let fear reclaim him now. He felt the stage beneath his feet, the warmth of Myra's presence beside him, the weight of every moment that had led them here. His voice, fragile, miraculous, born of struggle, wrapped itself around his courage as he prepared to release the first sound. And then it began. Their voices rose together, soft at first, weaving through the stillness like threads of light. The harmonies carried the tenderness of their bond, two souls shaped by loss, yet held together by hope. The first verse washed over the audience like a quiet prayer, gentle and unexpected, drawing them deeper into the siblings' world. But it was Eli's moment that changed everything. When the music swelled, he stepped into a part of the song meant for the strongest voices. A note that demanded power, breath, and fearlessness. The kind of note he had been told his body could never sustain. He reached for it anyway. The sound that emerged was not just strong, it was haunting, pure, impossibly controlled. It rose through the theater like a surge of emotion, lifting every heart with it. The crowd froze. Judges leaned forward. No one moved. No one breathed. It was the kind of moment that rewrote everything, the kind where a boy once too weak to run suddenly soared higher than anyone believed he could. And standing beside him, Myra's eyes filled with quiet, trembling pride. For in that single, impossible note, Eli had broken every limitation that once defined him. When Eli's final note faded into the vastness of the theater, the silence that followed felt unreal, like the entire world had paused on a single breath. It hung in the air, delicate and trembling, as though even the walls themselves needed a moment to understand what had just happened. Mira and Eli stood frozen at the center of the stage, their bodies still shaped by the emotion of the song, their chests rising and falling with the weight of everything they'd poured into that performance. Then, something extraordinary happened. The silence broke, not with noise, but with emotion. A wave of breath swept through the audience as people finally exhaled, many with trembling hands covering their mouths, others wiping tears that had fallen without their permission. The siblings couldn't see individual faces clearly through the lights, but they could feel it. The shift. The warmth. The awe. It washed over them like a tide, soft yet overwhelming. The judges rose from their seats, one by one, creating a ripple of movement that transformed the entire theater. Their expressions carried something deeper than surprise. It was the kind of look reserved for moments that could not be explained, only felt. Moments where raw humanity touched something holy. Moments where talent and heart collided in a way that left the world changed. On stage, Eli's legs trembled. His hands shook at his sides. The note he had released still echoed inside his chest, but now it shared space with something new, relief, disbelief, and a quiet, powerful pride. He turned slightly, his eyes searching for Myra's presence. She stood beside him, tears shimmering on her lashes, her shoulders rising with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The warmth of the lights reflected off her expression, revealing a joy so pure it almost hurt. Together, they stepped forward, unsure but guided by instinct, as applause thundered through the room. It grew louder with each passing second, an eruption of sound so powerful it seemed to shake the air itself. People rose to their feet, some clapping, some crying, some simply staring as if they had witnessed something impossible. For the first time in their lives, Mira and Eli felt the world looking at them not with pity, but with admiration. Not with concern, but with wonder. In that moment, under the brightest lights they had ever known, the siblings realized something they had never dared to believe. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It now belonged to everyone who had just witnessed a miracle. The morning sun rose slowly over a quiet coastal town in the Philippines, brushing the rooftops with a warm golden glow. Inside a small wooden house patched with years of struggle, a young man named Rico de la Vega, 22, sat at the edge of his bed, holding an old, worn-out vinyl record, his grandfather's favorite Elvis album. The edges were cracked, the cover faded, yet to him it was a treasure. It was the first thing that ever made him believe that music could heal a wounded heart. Rico's life had always traveled through storms. His father walked away when he was 8, leaving behind silence that echoed for years. His mother worked long days and longer nights, returning home exhausted but trying to smile. In that silence, music became his only companion. He learned to sing with the same softness he used to mend his own pain. But even with a voice rich in emotion, Rico carried doubt like a shadow. His words stumbled. His confidence broke easily. He often felt his dreams were too big for someone living in a house too small to hold them. The only person who saw his light clearly was Lana, his 17-year-old sister. She was gentle, patient, and fiercely protective of him. Where Rico saw fear, Lana saw potential. Where he hesitated, she encouraged. She believed his voice had the power to move people, not just because it sounded good, but because it carried truth. Every night, she would sit beside him as he practiced in the dim light of a single bulb, his voice drifting out into the quiet streets. Neighbors passing by often stopped to listen. His songs carried both the weight of his struggles and the warmth of his heart. It was Lana who convinced him to audition for America's Got Talent. She filled out the forms, held his hand through every doubt, and reminded him that dreams don't belong only to those who are confident, they belong to those who never stop trying. Now, miles away from home, Rico stood behind the AGT stage curtains. His heart pounded. His palms were cold. The arena felt like a universe too big for him. But he closed his eyes and remembered his grandfather's promise, the promise that a broken beginning doesn't define the final song. With a trembling breath, Rico stepped into the spotlight, carrying every hope he had left. The moment Rico stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, the world seemed to stretch far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Bright lights washed over him like a sudden wave, and for a second, he felt as if he couldn't breathe. The stage felt massive, almost too massive for someone who came from a tiny wooden house near the sea. The audience shifted, whispering, waiting, wondering who he was and what he would bring. Rico's heartbeat echoed in his ears. He tried to steady it, but the noise inside his chest only grew louder. He had sung in front of crowds before, small gatherings, local fiestas, school events, but this stage was different. This was the kind of stage where dreams either soared or shattered in seconds. He glanced at the judges' table. 4 faces. 4 destinies. 4 paths that could change his life. And among them was Simon Cowell, the one whose approval could open doors he never thought he could reach. The weight of that reality pressed heavily on Rico's shoulders. As he stood in the center of the stage, memories from his past flickered like old film reels. The tiny karaoke machine he used as a child. The nights he sang to drown out loneliness. The promise he made to himself that one day, somehow, he would show the world who he was. But dreams were fragile things. The music began to play, soft at first, familiar but intimidating under such powerful speakers. Rico took a breath, but the breath wavered. His first note trembled, thin and shaky. It wasn't the voice he practiced. It wasn't the voice Lana believed in. It was the voice of fear. In the audience, he felt shoulders stiffen. He sensed doubts rising. And then, he saw it. Simon Cowell's hand moving upward. A gesture that had ended countless dreams. A sign that the performance wasn't strong enough to continue. Time seemed to slow. Rico felt the stage tilt beneath him, as if everything he had worked for was slipping away. His throat tightened. His palms sweated. His entire world narrowed into one terrifying realization: this might be the end before his real beginning even started. Backstage, Lana pressed her hands together, silently pleading for him not to break. In that fragile, quiet moment, Rico stood between the life he lived and the life he wanted, suspended in a single breath. And that breath would change everything. The arena seemed to hold its breath as Simon's hand hovered in the air. For Rico, it felt like the entire world was narrowing into that single gesture. A lifetime of struggle, practice, sacrifice, and silent nights suddenly felt dangerously close to slipping away. His chest tightened. His knees weakened. His dream trembled under the weight of the moment. But then, something shifted. Somewhere deep inside him, past the layers of fear, past the memories of doubt, past every moment he thought he wasn't enough, Rico felt a familiar warmth. It was the voice of the boy who used to sing beside his grandfather's old radio. The boy who believed music could heal even the deepest wounds. The boy who promised he would never stop singing. That boy awakened. Rico closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to finally face it. He drew a breath, steady and deep, as if pulling strength from every painful experience he had survived. The breath traveled through him like a quiet fire, pushing away the trembling, replacing fear with purpose. And then he sang. But this time, it was different. The note that left his lips did not belong to the frightened young man who had stepped on stage minutes ago. It came from a place raw and powerful, filled with heartbreak, resilience, and an aching beauty. His voice rose like a wave breaking free from the darkest ocean. It carried warmth, depth, and a striking echo of Elvis, yet it remained undeniably his own. The crowd froze. People shifted forward in their seats, pulled by an unseen magnet. Some held their breath without realizing it. Even the judges leaned closer, eyebrows lifting as if they had just witnessed something impossible. Rico's voice soared higher, steadier, sweeping through the arena with an unexpected strength. The trembling that once cracked his first notes disappeared. A new confidence emerged, blossoming like a flame in the darkness. Every rise and fall of his tone carried the energy of someone who had finally stepped into the truth of who he was meant to be. Simon's raised hand slowly lowered. Something extraordinary was happening. Something rare. Something unforgettable. Rico wasn't just singing anymore. He was revealing the soul he had protected all his life. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't scream. They simply listened, silent, stunned, captured. Because they all knew. This was the moment his life was turning into a story people would never stop talking about. The moment Rico's voice rose into the arena, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the room itself awakened, stirred by a sound that carried both the ache of the past and the hope of the future. His notes moved with a kind of sincerity that could only be born from struggle. Each rise of his tone carried emotion heavy enough to touch even the coldest hearts. Slowly, people began to rise from their seats. One row stood, then another, and soon the entire front section of the theater leaned forward, connected by an invisible thread woven from Rico's voice. The audience wasn't reacting out of excitement, they were reacting out of emotion. His performance no longer felt like a competition, it felt like a story being told through sound. Faces softened. Eyes glistened. Hands pressed against chests as if trying to steady the sudden rush of feeling. Those who had come expecting just another contestant now found themselves witnessing something far more intimate, a young man pouring his whole life onto a stage thousands of miles from home. Backstage, Lana watched from the small monitor, her hands trembling as she pressed them together. She had seen him sing his entire life, yet she had never seen him like this. This wasn't the shy brother who once doubted every step he took. This was someone transformed, someone who had taken all his fear and turned it into fire. As Rico continued, the lights above him brightened, creating a soft halo around his silhouette. The stage no longer looked intimidating. It looked like it belonged to him. Every motion, every breath, every note felt intentional. His voice wrapped around the arena with warmth, as if comforting everyone who listened. Even the judges, known for their cool composure, seemed undone. Their expressions softened, their eyes fixed on the young Filipino singer who had risen from a trembling start into a breathtaking performance. They sensed it, the rare kind of talent that comes not only from skill, but from a heart that has lived through storms and still chooses to shine. When Rico hit his final, soaring note, it felt as if time briefly stopped. The sound lingered in the air, long enough to stir something deep within every listener. And then, the arena erupted. Thunderous applause surged from every direction. People stood, clapped, cheered, some wiping away tears they didn't expect to shed. It wasn't just appreciation, it was gratitude. Gratitude for the reminder that even the quietest dreams could rise louder than fear. In that overwhelming roar, Rico realized what he had just done. He hadn't just performed. He had changed hearts. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the arena like a wave that refused to settle, rising and falling with the power of thousands of hands celebrating the moment they had just witnessed. Rico stood in the center of that storm, overwhelmed by the sound he had once only dreamed of hearing. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply breathed, allowing the reality of everything to sink in. The bright stage lights softened as the camera zoomed closer, capturing the emotion glistening in his eyes. Beneath the glow, he looked both young and timeless, like a boy who had finally found the courage to stand inside his own light. He felt the presence of every person who had walked with him through the dark, his mother's strength, his grandfather's passion for music, the quiet nights of practice, the morning bus rides, the disappointments, and the resilience that carried him forward. Backstage, Lana burst into tears. Not out of sadness, but out of the overwhelming joy of watching her brother rise beyond everything they had survived. She had always seen his potential, but now the world was seeing it too. Her trembling hands covered her mouth as she watched him take in the standing ovation that stretched across the arena like a sea of admiration. The judges rose from their seats. Their expressions had changed from curiosity to awe, from uncertainty to respect. Their applause felt heavier, fuller, as if acknowledging that they had just witnessed not just talent, but transformation. Rico had arrived as a contestant. He was leaving as something much bigger. Social media erupted in real time. Clips of his performance flooded every platform. Comments poured in from around the world, people inspired, people moved, people grateful for the reminder that someone who came from so little could give so much. In homes across the Philippines, families gathered around screens, cheering for a boy who carried their pride onto one of the world's biggest stages. As Rico stepped off the stage, Lana rushed toward him. Their embrace was tight, filled with all the unspoken memories of sacrifice and hope. In that moment, it didn't matter how far they had traveled or how impossible the journey once seemed. Rico hadn't just sung a song. He had told his story. He had honored his roots. He had turned pain into purpose. And as the applause finally began to fade, one thing became clear. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a legacy the world would never forget.